The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field, which a person finds and hides again, and out of joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. When he finds a pearl of great price, he goes and sells all that he has and buys it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net thrown into the sea, which collects fish of every kind. When it is full, they haul it ashore and sit it down to put what is good into buckets, and what is bad they throw away. Thus it will be at the end of the age. The angels will go out and separate the wicked from the righteous, and throw them into a fiery furnace, where they will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Do you understand all these things?" They answered, "Yes." And he replied, "Then every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven is like a head of a household, who brings from his storeroom both the new and the old." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My brothers and sisters in Christ, St. Paul's letter to the Romans today can be sometimes a little bit confusing. Somebody actually had asked me about this. And it says, "We know that all things work for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. For those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And those he predestined, he also called," and so on and so on. And I want you to be absolutely clear to understand that the church has never, in 2,000 years of her history, and even today, and until the end of time, will never teach predestination. Now, there are many religions on the face of the earth that do teach predestination. We're not one of them. The Muslims teach it. There are many Christian denominations that teach it. And everybody else, if you're predestined, you're going to heaven. Everybody else is going to hell. And the reason the church does not accept that principle, even though Paul here mentioned it, but he's looking at it from a different perspective. He's looking at it from God's perspective. Because God knows all things. God knows who will be saved and who will be lost. But the Catholic Church has always taught, plain and simple, that every human being has a free will. No human being is simply determined or created to be sent to hell. No one. God made no robots. He wants no robots in heaven. He wants people who have chosen through free will action to do the will of God in whatever way that God calls them. So in this life, there is no predestination for us. Church has never taught that. Every human being, no matter what kind of life they have lived, can at the last moment, the last breath that they take, change their minds, be converted, ask for forgiveness, do their time in purgatory, and go to heaven. The predestination that Paul is talking about here is in God. God who knows all things. He knows whether I will be saved or whether I'll be lost. He knows whether you'll be saved or whether you'll be lost. But you don't know it and I don't know it. So therefore, we have to work at our salvation every day. And we aren't like other Christian denominations who sell salvation by simply pulling a slot machine. Once saved, always saved. On this particular date, in July 1958, let's say I was saved. So therefore, God owes me salvation. Well, no, I'm sorry. God owes you nothing. Not even salvation. And when you stand before the judgment seat of Christ, he's going to tell you, no, that's not my theology. You have to work out your theology. You have to work out your salvation every day. You're not saved one particular day and the rest of your life doesn't matter. The church doesn't teach that either. So just remember, as we read this from St. Paul, it's a reference to what God knows. Not what we human beings know. We can't point the finger at each other, say, yeah, you're saved, you're lost, you're saved, you're lost, and so on and so on. Because that would be absolutely wrong. We don't know who's saved and lost. We won't know until the day we die and stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Then we'll have our answer. Remember what I told you before in my homilies. Our life is our judgment. Not that God makes a judgment. God doesn't have to make a judgment. It's our life, the life that we have lived. That is our determination whether we will be in heaven, hell, or purgatory. So we need to keep a close eye on our lives so we can get to heaven one day. And today I want to draw a little something out from the Old, as our gospel readings tell us today. And some of you may actually remember this. I don't know. This was a talk given on a radio station by Paul Harvey. Yeah, I see a lot of smiles. A lot of people know Paul Harvey. And this is the rest of the story, as he would always say, right? But this is a talk that he gave one day, almost 60 years ago. And it's amazing how accurate and how well he hit the nail on the head. And this is how he started out. If I were the devil, I would gain control of the most powerful nation in the world, and I would begin with a campaign of whispers. How many of our elections, not just president election, but most of our elections, start out with somebody talking about somebody, whispers, and so on? It becomes very much a part of the elective process. I would delude their minds into thinking they have not come from man, that they have come from man's effort instead of God's blessing. And how many times do we think, as Americans, that everything we have is because we did it? We don't put God into the equation. We don't think that God called us together as a nation from different lands, different places, and made us the United States, and made us America, and gave us the strength that we have to be an example to other nations. Not to become the city of Babylon. We have forgotten that God has called us together, and everything we have is because of Him. I don't know what it was like 60 years ago, but I don't think that thought was even there in people's minds. I would promote an attitude of loving things and using people instead of the other way around. If you remember in the book of Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, God goes looking for Adam. And Adam was hiding. And God says to Adam, why were you hiding? Because I was ashamed. Why were you ashamed? Because I was naked. They had been naked the whole time. God knew that they had eaten from the forbidden fruit of the tree. What happened at that particular instant, and what came into existence in the human being, is still with us today. You see, Adam and Eve saw each other as a subject of love and a subject of good. With the original sin comes something completely different. Now the human being becomes an object of use. And nobody wants to be used. Nobody. Part of our broken nature now. We use other people to make ourselves happy. To get whatever we want. We'll tell lies, we'll steal, we'll cheat, we'll sell our souls. It doesn't matter. Whatever's necessary. So we can make ourselves happy. Never counting the cost of the damage we do to another human being because we like to use people. Instead of seeing them as a good created by God. It's part of the original sin. I would dupe entire states into relying on gambling for their state revenue. I don't know if that was available 60 years ago, but I know in New Mexico, the entire economy basically, certainly for the Indian reservations and even New Mexico, is on gambling and the lottery. And if people don't buy tickets, everybody starts to panic. So what happens? You get people hooked on gambling. And then you got big billboards on the highway. Say, if you have a gambling problem, call this number. And on top of that, the number that you call is toll-free because you probably won't have a quarter left to call somebody. So they have to make it toll-free because by that time you've lost everything already anyways, which is sad. I would convince people that character is not an issue when it comes to leadership. How true that is today, huh? It's no longer about character, but the goodness of a human being that's going to lead us one day. It's going to lead this country, lead our local place, and so on and so on. Why is it that Catholics vote in pro-abortion candidates into high offices? Why? Because we no longer look at the character. We've long forgotten the value of the human being. It's whenever we think that a person can do for us. That's how we vote them into office. Their character's got nothing to do with it. Their quality, that's got nothing to do with it. I would make it legal to take the life of unborn babies. Now remember, Paul Harvey says this before the Supreme Court passed the law that you can kill a baby in the womb. I would make it legal to take the life of an unborn baby. Who would ever think of such a thing? An unborn baby is already another human being unto itself. It depends on its mother for life, for nourishment. All the way until it gets about 18 years old and go out on its own to get a job and to get a house, to live, get married, and so on and so on. That would make it legal to take the life of unborn babies. It would be about 5 years after he said that it became a law. I would make it socially acceptable to take one's own life and invent machines to make it convenient. I don't know how many of you remember Dr. Kevorkian, who had the little machine things, with the little tubes, and you plug it in, and you flip a switch, and off you go into La La Land. Well, it kind of died out. He was sent to prison, and the idea but it never disappeared. We're now coming back to it in a different way. It's called the question of the end of life. It's no longer called suicide. It's called about the end of life and dying with dignity. A person shouldn't have to suffer. Well, all I can say is, let me suffer. Let me live as long as God wills it. Let suffering be redemptive in my life as it's supposed to be for my sins. That's what suffering is all about. God doesn't want to see us suffer. But sometimes he allows us to suffer in his life because it's redemptive for us. I would cheapen human life as much as possible, that the life of animals are valued more than human beings. Go to the city of London today. Open bestiality is everywhere. You can go into bars. It's advertised. I remember recently reading a story about a woman in Israel who had an advertisement in a newspaper. She was looking for a minister or anyone in some sort of authority who would wed her to a dolphin. Yeah, a dolphin. Took her 3 months and $30,000. She found somebody, I don't know who, but somebody. And when I read that story, I said to myself, there goes my fishing. Because if I hook a dolphin, I might have somebody's husband. I got to put him back. course, I've never hooked a dolphin, but, if they're swimming along the boat, I might have to say, be social to them, right? Could be somebody's husband anyways. People want to marry their animals. It's a very common thing these days. Their dogs, horses, and so on and so on. We'd like to think we're living in a time where we look at things a lot clearer. We look at things a lot straighter with a greater clarity of mind. But in reality, I think technology has made us more stupid and ignorant than we have been probably in centuries. We think it's made us better, but it really hasn't. I would take God out of the schools, where even a mention of his name would be grounds for a lawsuit. How true is that, huh? You can't even say an Our Father at a graduation ceremony. I remember Georgetown University fought terribly for many years. Catholic University. They lost. They had to take all their crucifixes out of the classrooms, out of their buildings and everything. They appealed. Some years later, they won and they were able to put their crucifixes back, but now they're under attack again. They'll probably lose again. It's a continuous struggle. And people who pray and the Ten Commandments and so on and so on. Look at Oklahoma City, where they took out the Ten Commandments from the front of one of the government buildings, and they put up an 8-foot-tall statue of Lucifer. What in the world? Where are we today? Where's our minds? And you wonder why things happen the way they do. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could and tranquilize the rest with pills. Now, many of us say, well, I don't do drugs. But how many of us take pills? Because the doctor's given them to us. So we justify them. I would come up with drugs that sedate the mind, target the young. And I would get sports heroes to advertise them, huh? And I remember reading a story of one of the exorcists in Rome. And by the way, Rome now has over 100 official exorcists in the city of Rome alone, where some dioceses barely have one. They have over 100. But this particular exorcist was one of the first and one of the main exorcists, God rest his soul. But he said, he was called to a mental institution to evaluate a young man to see whether this man really had a mental issue or there was something else going on. When he came out of the institution, he shook his head. He said, 80% of the people don't need to be in that place. He said, 80% of the people that are there need an exorcism. They don't need pills. Pills are not going to solve their problems. They need an exorcist. We don't realize how much the devil influences our lives and our world today. I would get control of the media so that every night I would pollute the mind of every family member for my agenda. How many people spend hours on their little computer things? And I've had conversations with people while they're talking to me, their fingers are doing this. It's the strangest thing I've ever seen. It's because they spend so much time on the computer. I remember talking with a guy one day, his eyes were doing this while he was talking to me. I said, can you stop that for a moment and just look at me? He said, what? I said, you do realize your eyes are moving across a computer screen, right? He couldn't stop. We spend so much time on these things, they just sedate us. They're like drugs. We got to have them. We can't spend a day without them. We'll spend 6 to 8 hours on these things, this technology. But oh my gosh, ask somebody to say a prayer for 2 minutes and we fall apart. We want to yell and scream. I've seen it, I know. I would get control of the media so that every night I would I would attack the family, the backbone of any nation. It's exactly what's happened in our country. We no longer understand what a nucleus family is. The family today is under attack. If you have 4 children or more and you go into a grocery store, somebody will smirk at you. Somebody will look down upon you. If they don't have the gumption to even say something to you and curse at you. I have friends who have told me that has happened to them. Imagine for a moment if St. Catherine of Siena, her mother, had lived today. They probably would have taken her out back at Walmart and hung her. St. Catherine of Siena was a 24th child of 25 children. She literally dropped babies as she walked along. Nobody said a word. It was a sign of the grace of God to have a big family. And one of the great saints and doctors of the church came out of that family. By the time she's 5 years old, she's practicing penances. But nowadays, the family's under attack. The form of the family is under attack. I would make divorce acceptable and easy and even fashionable. Because if the family crumbles, so does the nation. And sadly enough, today the divorce rate in the Catholic Church is the same as it is in the secular world, 51%. Where have we gone wrong? Marriage is a sacrament. It's supposed to help give us the grace to keep us together through all trials and all the difficulties. But we don't make the effort because we don't have the backbone. Maybe we didn't have a good example growing up. I don't know. So nowadays it becomes fashionable. I remember some years ago traveling across the country, and I stopped in a Denny's to get some lunch. And there was these 2 young girls sitting behind me. And apparently one of them was getting married that Saturday, because I got over here their conversation. They were talking kind of loud and giggling and so on. And the one friend asked the bride, to be, so what are you going to do if this marriage doesn't work out with Paul? Oh, I'll just get a divorce. I didn't have my clerics on. I had a regular shirt on. Did I want to turn around and smack her? I didn't. All I can do is pray for people, right? I would compel people to express their most depraved fantasies on canvas and movie screens. I mean, look at the movies today. They're all dark, sexual, depraved, strange things. And art. If you look at some of the art of the Middle Ages, you can literally see God in the images, the saints. If you look today, you can see nothing. You have to look and say, what is that? They recently had an exposition, I know, in Paris, maybe not so about 2 years ago, I think, where they had an artist who took a statue of Madonna and put her into a glass jar and filled it up with urine. Called it art. And had it there. Who ever heard of such a thing? I would convince the world that people are born homosexuals and that their lifestyle should be accepted, marveled, and compassionate. And this is going to be definitely politically incorrect. I've not been known to be politically correct any time, so it doesn't matter. I remember reading an article some years ago by some American scientists who said that they found a gene that proves that homosexuality is a gene. It's a problem you're born with. Then 6 months later, I read an article in a journal from England. And as though some scientists over there challenge the American scientists and say, please show us that gene, we can't find it. And remember what I said in the beginning, God created no robots. If he made a human being a homosexual, he owes him salvation because they can't help it. They just became a robot. So he owes him salvation. Homosexuality is a choice. Always has been. and always will be. No matter what they try to sell us. I would convince the people that right and wrong are determined by a few who call themselves authorities, and their agenda is politically correct. I remember having a conversation with a young man who was in college not too long ago, who said to me, well, you know, it's the law of the country. You can have an abortion. You can be married to a guy or to a girl, whatever, and so on. So therefore, it's okay. He was a practicing Catholic on top of that. And I had to remind him, I said, think for a moment that no human court, no human being may ever overstep God's boundaries. There are laws that God has placed into creation. No one has a right, no one, not even the Supreme Court, has a right to overstep those boundaries. But they did it anyways. They put themselves above God. There will be a price to pay. I would persuade people that the church is irrelevant and out of date. How many times have I had conversation with people who told me, well, the church needs to change this, they need to do that, and so on and so on. You know, I said, well, if we did everything that everybody wanted, we'd have no church. You wouldn't even recognize it anymore. We might as well all become Protestants, because we'd have nothing left but maybe the Bible. I would dull the minds of Christians and make them believe that prayer is not important, that faithfulness and obedience are optional. How many Catholics believe that today? Like I said, 6 hours on a computer and their little technology things, can't pray for 2 minutes. Too distracted. So therefore it's not important. Prayer is not important. Faithfulness and obedience were always an option. Instead of being an absolute a part of my life. If I were the devil, I would make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. How true is that, huh? Trying to always sell us chocolate Easter bunnies and call it Easter eggs and liquor for Christmas. Sad. But I want you to know something about Easter. Easter was a pagan holiday long before the time of Christ. It was a Roman holiday that celebrated spring. We tried to Christianize it. We called it Resurrection Sunday. And we went right back to Easter. Now you and I, when we talk of Easter, hopefully we think of resurrection, we think of what Christ did for us, and so on and so on, but it's rooted deeply in paganism. And in the end, he says, I guess I would leave things pretty much the way that men have made them. Now you can find this on the internet. That's where I got it. 60 years ago. Where have we gone wrong, huh? That we have fallen into all of these traps. And how could Paul Harvey know so well that we would fall into these traps? And now you know the rest of the story. Paul Harvey, by the way, for those of you who don't know him, used to finish his radio show that way, and now you know the rest of the story.